It's Jane McElvany Coonce here, and today we're going to be painting parts of landscapes and how to add to your paintings. I thought we would start with basic things like trees that have leaves, and then also bare trees. Grass underneath the tree in the shadow of the grass, and then we'll move on to other things like water. In the dusk sky painting that we did, we might even do some tall grasses and things and how to do that. So let me turn around here. Let me know if you cannot see well enough or if my camera's not aimed properly, just tell me. All right, so I'm going to first start with just doing a tree and reflecting it into some water, because I think that a lot of landscapes have trees in them. That's just sort of something that happens. And I don't buy tubes of green. I mix my green. And I will give you a couple recipes that I think are very good. If you use ultramarine blue and cad yellow, it will make the yellow-green color. If you use ultramarine blue and yellow ochre, it'll make more of a mid-tone green. And then if you want to go even darker, you could add more blue, less yellow ochre, and if you need it even darker, you could either add a pinpoint of burnt sienna or a pinpoint of alizarin crimson, believe it or not. Green and red are across the color wheel, and that will really make it dark. So I'll show you. This would be the color if you're doing the yellow-green part of the tree. So you can see it's very, very warm looking, like the sun is hitting it. The mid-tone color might be something like this. A little more mid-tone, not bright yellow, and then this might be a little darker. So when I do trees, the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to outline like this, because what you'll end up with is a lollipop tree, and it's going to look very, very fake. So what I try to do is when I'm going to paint a tree, let's just get rid of that, get rid of all of that. I try to draw with dotted lines of where I'm going to put this tree. So for example, I might draw sort of like, I try to make it uneven, not perfectly shaped, so that it has some interest to it. And I do look at the photograph, but I also try to exaggerate some of the things like that. So it's a sort of a dotted line, and it's not a definite line. I could go in and out of that line. And I would start, if the sun is coming, let's say from the left, I would start by putting some of this yellow-green, and as I put it down, I'm using the side of the brush. Don't do this polka dot stuff. That looks very amateurish. You want to think about how light hits a tree. It's hitting on the edge and the tops of branches that are facing the sun. I try to make a few stroke marks go off the edge of that line, and I pull some of this yellow-green in this way. Now it's time to, maybe even the light might hit down here. But now it's time to go towards the mid-tone color, which is the ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and just ultramarine blue, yellow ochre. And this time I'm going to use, again, the side of the brush. I'm just kind of pushing it on there. And again, as I get over to this side, I let a few pieces of paint come off so it feels very feathery looking, almost leaf-like, not hard edge like it's been hedge clipped. And then, of course, we have the darkest color. And this time I'm going to use the same thing, ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. I'll show you what happens when you add a little bit of alizarin. And when I say a little bit, again, pinpoint, because that color is strong. It gets darker very quickly. I could even add a little more blue to that too and really get it dark. So now we have some darker colors underneath some of the branches, and it's beginning to feel like it has some form. Let's say after you finish, you go, oh, I see a little place where the yellow-green is hitting over in the sort of shadowy mid-tone area. You can go back in and again tap on a little lighter green where you see it. Then you put in the trunk of the tree, not before. A lot of people make the mistake of when they paint a tree, they paint it by doing the trunk and drawing all the branches, and then they think they can fill in the green, and what happens is these branches look like they're on one side of the tree and there's no leaves growing there, it looks kind of ridiculous. So if you put the tree in first, then you can come in and put your trunk of your tree in. And again, you might see it in other places. If you do, you can take, I'm just going to use a flat brush, oops, and I'm just using burnt umber. And you can just kind of, you know, make a few little branches up in here a little bit. Just a few here and there. You don't really need a lot. Maybe the trunk forks, you know, if it forks, you could have it like that. As it touches the ground, it's going to hit grass. And again, you can use some of the same colors that you used in the tree. But think about the ground. It's facing the sun. It's flat. And so the sun is hitting that flatness, and it's going to look pretty yellow-green almost everywhere except for where there's a shadow. So in this case, what I would do is for a tree, I like to use the side of the brush and brush up. And the reason I like to brush up is because it makes it look like grass all of a sudden. And so you can quickly get things covered. Now there is a shadow under this tree. So I would come in here with the ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and a little bit of darkness, you know, if you need burnt sienna or alizarin, and put a little shadow under that tree so that it looks like, you know, that the tree is casting a shadow. And then you can...
What brush for the grass?
I'm using a bristle brush. And it's just a
Filbert?
filbert, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this is the basic kind of tree that you're going to do. I think the tricks are, number one, no polka dots. 2, draw a dotted line on the edge and make it go in and out so it's interesting. And 3, when you get to the edge, let some paint go off that dotted line, and some paint, of course, is thicker in here in the middle part. You might also have a few sky holes in there, and what I mean by that is little places where the blue sky is showing through, and you could let it dry and put them in, or you can try to put them in while it's wet. Don't go overboard with a lot of sky holes. You might have a few here and there, but if you put too many in, it starts looking kind of fake. So, you know, you can break up a little bit. If you want to just break it up just a little bit, add a few little sky holes here and there. Now, if you have a shrub, same thing follows, where there's a light side and a dark side to the shrub. So let's say if we wanted to put a little shrub here, the shrub might be, if it's a flowering shrub, I would paint the flowers first so that they stay clean. But if it's not, you can put a little bit of light hitting the edge of that shrub, go into your halftone. Oops, that looks a little too yellow. Hold on. Let's add a little more ultramarine blue. And then, of course, as the shrub hits the ground, it's going to be very, very dark. And so down in here, you're going to have... With a shrub, you don't normally have a trunk showing. Again, this is kind of a rounded shrub. I might kind of change the shape just to make it a little more interesting. And again, make a few stroke marks that come off. Your eye will connect them. Even if they're not connected to your tree, the eye will connect it and make it look like it's supposed to be that way. Now, let's say you wanted to reflect this. Let's say this is at a river bank, and we want to reflect it into water. So let's say here's the river bank. I'm just going to take a little bit of the burnt umber and add just a little bit of white and put sort of an edge to this. And say this is right at the edge of the water. So this is like a little dirt or sand. And you do have to anchor that by putting a little dark, and I just tap it on, don't draw a line, but just tap on a dark line underneath that to make that sit. The ground doesn't float, but it sits when you put sort of a thing like that on. And then we're going to reflect the tree. Now, one thing about reflections is they have to be directly under. I've seen people put the reflection over here, and I'll say, well, how come you put it over there? And they'll say, well, it's windy and the reflection's blowing. Now, that doesn't happen. If the wind blows, it might make it look choppy, but it's going to be directly under the tree. Well, somebody needs to mute themselves. Gerda? Or somebody. Can everybody mute themselves, please?
Maggie.
Maggie, can you mute yourself?
I'm muted. I'm muted.
Boy, that's terrible.
Does she have on?
All right, let me just look and see who's not muted. Hold on a second.
She has two showing.
She has two?
Yeah. She has two. Muted. Now she has one.
Okay, Maggie, you are not unmuted. You got to mute yourself.
Mute. Now she has two again.
Maggie, you're not muted, and it's really making a big racket. Yeah, you do have two of them. That's probably why it's doing it.
She has to actually turn the microphone off. It won't work to unmute.
I muted her, so
Oh, you were able to.
she's not going to be able to ask any questions. All right, let's continue. Sorry about that. All right, now we're moving to the reflection. And remember that if a tree, like this one, has a trunk here and one going this way, then when you reflect it, you have to go the opposite way. So here's what I mean by that. In a reflection, you would have this coming down. You'd probably have a little grass. You'd have the trunk, and then you'd have that little V going this way. We can use all the same colors that we used before. So there's a little yellow-green here. That would probably reflect right under here. And that's actually the grass reflecting. But notice how the tree is much darker than the grass. So now we're going to go back to our mid-tone ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. And what I would do is don't worry about the shape of the tree. We want to get it directly under first. And I always stroke vertically first. We can always come back and stroke horizontally. But stroke vertically, and you also want to get the watercolor in there at the same time. So let's put a little green down. And then let's say the sky is blue. So I'm going to mix up a little ultramarine blue, cerulean, and white. And we're going to put a little bit of sky color down next to it. And the reason is we want to blend into that. That's too dark. Hold on. We want to be able to blend into it. So first of all, I'm going to just do it sort of straight up and down and vertical. And we also have this bush reflecting. So let's put that in there. There's a little grass and then this little shorter bush here. And reflections, depending on the sun, can be a little bit longer than the actual thing, or they can be the exact same size. So there's a little yellowy green, and then I'll put a little water here. So after you have everything blocked in vertically, like this, then what you want to do is you want to give the impression, not that this is a racing stripe, but that this is a very soft, blurred edge. And I would take my brush, and I would just, right at the edge, kind of cut back and forth into the green and the blue, both sides. And you can kind of wipe your brush and soften it. You want things a little soft. We may come back in and add a little more green. Same here. Soften the edge. I'm going to go back in and just add a little bit more green here. Oops. A little darker at the bottom. Maybe a little lighter at the top, because it is lighter at the top. And then what I would suggest is to tell people that this is water. What you can do, whether it's in the photograph or not, I do this a lot of times if I feel like the water doesn't look like it's really water. I take a very flat brush that has a nice chiseled edge, and I make a few little blue and white stripes, just a few, not tons, just here and there. Oops. Hold on. That's terrible. put one through this one too. And those little stripes are enough to tell people that this is a reflection. I would probably soften this light in here, between the light and the actin. So everything should be relatively soft in a reflection. If you had a man standing here with a bright red shirt on, in the reflection, it won't be as bright red. It'll be dulled down just a little bit. It'll be more of a dull red because, if you think about it, water is reflecting the sky. And if you mix red with blue, you're going to have a dull down color. It's not going to be a bright red like it would be here. So as you put the reflection of a man's shirt in here, if it's a bright color, keep it a little bit dulled down. Now let's say you have a tree that has, it's naked. It doesn't have any leaves. It's a bare tree. Which one of those photographs I gave you had? Let's see. What happened to it? Here's one. Let's look at this tree here. Let's say we have a bare tree. This is a little tricky in the sense of you want to make sure, I'm going to just pull this grass over a little bit more. You want to make sure that you have a realistic looking tree and not a rubbery looking tree. You want to avoid painting with squiggly marks. In other words, you don't want a tree that looks, you know, like a rubber snake. This does not look believable. It looks like, I don't know, it looks amateurish. So what I do is, and you can use burnt umber. If you want to go a little darker, you could add a little ultramarine blue to it. But I start off, now this tree, we can't see the trunk, so I'm going to sort of make it up, okay? Let's just put a kind of fat trunk here. I'm going to, again, have it split a little bit. And every time I want to switch directions, I'm going to pick my brush up, and I'm going to change directions. Let's get rid of this. I'm going to change directions because if you don't, what will happen is they'll start looking rubbery, and I want them to look natural. So every time I change directions, I'm going to lift my brush up and just pick it up. And you wouldn't think that would work, but it does. Then, of course, trees have tons of branches. Let's make this a little fatter down here. We might want one side of the tree to be just a little bit darker. This side here, it's away from the sun, so I'll put a little blue and brown on that side, and maybe a little blue and brown on this side of that branch. Then we want to switch to a brush called a rigger. And a rigger is a brush that has very long hair. And they're very skinny, like a pencil point. These are two of them. But they make great branches. And what I recommend is either dipping your brush in mineral spirits or in liquid, because it won't flow nicely. And again, every time you make a branch, pick up your brush, change directions. But it will make beautiful, beautiful skinny lines. And a rigger, I would just buy a cheap one. Go to Michael's and buy a cheap one if they have them there. They should. Cost you about $2 at Michael's. I mean, no need to buy an expensive one because you don't really use them that often, and you know, you're just basically using them to make skinny little lines. But they make very graceful lines too. They're very pretty, and I've seen a technique where people will put it down and then jerk their hand and then jerk their hand, and that can look good too. It kind of makes little knots as if the tree has little knots. But I think as long as you are changing your direction every time, you're picking up your brush and changing direction every time, you're going to get a really nice look. I don't think you can do really skinny branches without a rigger, because even a round brush, I'll show you, here's a round brush, they're going to be fatter. Well, that one's pretty skinny actually, but usually they're fatter and they don't look as good as, you know, when you use a rigger. And because riggers are cheap, you know, I think it's not so bad. If you had to reflect this is going to be more of a pain in the neck, because if you think about all these branches, what you could do is do the main branches reflecting and then just kind of take some little blue lines and break them up so that it doesn't show. Are there any questions? always remember to anchor everything that you put down, like this shrub, so it doesn't look like it's floating. I'd put a little darkness right at the base of it. A little darkness at the base of the tree, even a little darkness at the base of this tree. It just helps make the thing sit down and it's not floating. I might go back and hit a few little darks right at the edge of that water and make that lay down. Any questions about trees, tree shapes, brush strokes as far as doing a bare tree with reflection, stroking horizontally first and then breaking and softening the edges by stroking horizontally. Always wiping your brush so that you're not just pushing paint into paint, but sort of blending it. All right, we're going to switch to the other one then, the dusk one. Oh, I know. Actually, Steve asked me a question. Suppose we wanted some distant trees and then distant mountains. If you're going to put distant trees in there, you can't use anything like cad yellow because cad yellow, or I can't see yellow after about 500 yards. So you would use yellow ochre for anything that's in the distance, and it needs to be grayed down a little bit. So I might even add just a little bit of cad red to my mixture. You know, if you mix blue and yellow, like ultramarine blue and yellow ochre, add a little cad red, you'll get more of a gray-green. Hold on a second. You just don't want anything real bright. Colors in the distance, let's say these are trees off in the distance. Colors in the distance are going to be a little more grayed down. They're going to be, they could be more blue, like you could take cerulean, which is a cooler blue, and put them back there. Don't let them be too dark. Say these are trees way off in the distance. And then let's say you wanted to have some mountains back here too. This is where, and here's a picture of one of mountains in the background. Keep in mind that mountains are really covered with trees, but they don't look green because it's so far away that the veils of air in between where you're standing and where the mountains are making them look blue or sometimes purple. It's funny, if you ever drive out west and you are approaching the mountains, the Shenandoah Mountains, they will look blue at first, but the closer you get, the more they look like they are trees, and they begin to have a little greenish color to them. They should be relatively, I'm going to put a blue. These are going to be the mountains behind the trees back there. And actually, in this case, they are. That would suggest that there are mountains back there.
What color are you using for that blue mountain?
This was ultramarine blue and cerulean and white, although I mixed it right next to what I was mixing here, so it could have gotten just a little bit of that grayish color in there. But yeah, it's basically ultramarine blue. I might gray that blue with a little, let's make this mountain a little bigger. But because if you have that purpley blue color, it's going to look more like a mountain as opposed to a tree. Whereas if you have a greenish gray color, it's going to look like trees in the distance.
And Jane, what colors did you say again that you used for the trees in the distance?
Oh, for these. I would still use the same combo of ultramarine blue and yellow ochre, but I would add a touch of like cad red light to gray it. Just so it's not bright. You don't want a bright green like that bush. You want it to be, or you could add cerulean blue, because cerulean blue actually, if you mix ultramarine blue and the yellow ochre and then add a little cerulean, it's going to give you a cooler color for the green. It's not going to be, like any of these colors here. So, all right. For the next one, we did a dusk cloud. Skyscape last week, and this time we're going to remember that when the sun is going down, you're not going to see a lot of color in greenery of trees. You might see a little green, but they're going to be darker. So here was the sky that we did. And I printed it out in black and white because it makes you realize, you know, how very little color there is in here. You know, same with this. They're all about the same. We don't see a light side of the tree and a dark side of the tree. And the only place you see light is where the light is hitting the deck because it's facing the sky. So things are going to be pretty dark in this painting, although not in the water because the water is going to reflect any colors that you used in the sky. Now, this is not the sky I used, so I can't paint this orange here. I have to follow what I have up here. And that may seem a little confusing. It's always nice if you have a painting that has the sky and the landscape perfect, just the way you want it, but it doesn't always happen that way. So one of the things to draw, when you're trying to draw, let's say you're drawing a dock and you're trying to get the angle correct, one of the things I suggest is hold your brush up on your photograph and put it right on the edge of that dock and move that right over to your painting and put it on your painting, just the way you see it. And check it, you know, put it here, the way you drew it, and put it back here and see if you got off. I might be off just a little bit. And then same for this bottom line, just kind of move it down here. And it does have sort of a darker side to the plank. And we have this one that is a little bit angled. Just a little bit. Not much though. With a boat, and if you want to ever put a boat in, one of the things I suggest is think about painting the boat as if you're going to package it up and send it by UPS. And here's what I mean by that. If I take this black and white photograph and I take a pencil, hold on, there's my pencil. Now let's take this. This is a charcoal pencil. And I have to put this boat in a box. The top of the boat would be, this is the highest point of anything on the boat right now. This is a little higher than that. So that's going to be where the box is. The front of the boat is probably the farthest thing out, so that's going to be part of the box. Kind of hard to tell in this photograph where's the boat and where's the reflection. I'm going to kind of guess that it's about right here. This is a little lower here. So this is the bottom of the boat. And here's the back of the boat. So if you have this box, you can figure out how many widths is the boat to the height. So if this is the height, that's 1. If I move it here, that's 1, 2. So it's about 2 to 1. And that should help you draw it. You could also draw that box on your canvas if you want, just to help you get this, you know, angle correct. You know, this is going to come up a little bit. This is curving a little bit. This one is coming out to here and then curving over to here. The boat is not very big here before that white line starts. Let's put that white line in because that will help us draw a little better. And then we have a little bit more that kind of goes into the reflection. It's almost hard to tell. You can tell where the boat stops because it curves in and the reflection turns out. So if this is the boat here, I'm going to just pull it towards the front. We can let this reflection kind of, and this would be not a perfectly straight line, and this one would not be a perfectly straight line. That's kind of what the boat is going to look like. So what I would do now is we've got these trees in the distance, which we want to put in, and we don't want them to be, I'm going to put this picture up too, because this one has trees in the distance, and if you look at these trees, they're kind of pretty in the sense that they're almost like purple. I don't know if that was because it was fall or if it was because of just the lighting. But if you're going to put a green in, don't have your green This may be too dark, but I'm going to put it. This is kind of that ultramarine blue and yellow ochre, and then I added just a little purple, a little alizarin and blue in it. Trying to give it sort of a, and I want the trees maybe higher on the edge, then maybe it dips down a little bit just for drama. And we'll have, as we come over here, I'm going to have them come up again. Kind of following this one more than this one. Also, you don't want the trees, they are dark, but I mean, they can be pretty dark. I mean, if you think about it, as the sun's going down, things start looking silhouetted. But I'd put a little color in there. Don't just mix blue and brown and make black. Put a little color in there, whether it's a little bit of green or a little bit of purple or maybe both. And then where they touch down to the water, it does have to be perfectly straight line. Whenever you have water meeting, sky meeting water, land meeting water, this is going to be perfectly straight across. If your photograph, you say to me, oh, but it's slanting downhill, that's because you didn't hold the camera straight. So be careful with getting fooled by that. There is a little bit of land showing there, and I might just take a little bit of maples and white or something, just kind of a cream color to kind of make a little suggestion of that there's land in here. Remember, land is laying flat, so the sun hits it and it's a little lighter than the trees are going to be. And then, of course, these trees have to reflect into the water. So while I have these colors mixed up with the ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and I think I put a little purple in there, I'm just going to drag. If it looks like a big tree, I'm going to drag it down more. If it looks like a shorter tree, drag it down less. And just try to follow what I have there. This one's sticking out a little bit more. These in here are a little shorter. Now you can see as I'm mixing, I'm not making exactly the same color. That doesn't always bother me though. I mean, sometimes that bothers people, but to me, if you are changing colors, I mean, it can be interesting, even if you're painting the same thing, you know, painting trees, but somehow they look slightly different color. I don't think that's a negative. All right, so now we have these trees in here. And then we come to the water. And in this case, I have to reflect this sky. I cannot follow that picture because that's an orange sky and orange. This is an orange sky and orange water. If you're doing one of these, then yes, put orange in there. But I've got to look and see what colors I put here. And I think I pretty much used ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, yellow, little yellow. So let's start off with this color here, which is next to the trees. And I'm just going to put in this blue here. And I'm stroking vertically because this is a reflection. And we can go in here and play with this, with the color. We'll blend all this in a minute, but first let's get it in there. Then we have this little yellow thing that's actually kind of pretty. I think I will put it above the boat. Like I said, it helps if you're working from a photograph that's the sky is correct. Oops, that's too much. All right, so I'm going to put a little bit of yellow right here next to the dock. There's a little bit of orange in there too, but that's on top, so it would be on the bottom here. And then after that, we come to this purple area again. So we could kind of go back into our purple colors. And that's the dock. Now, the dock is lighter than the boat. And notice that in order to make this look like it's laying flat, you've got to stroke these. They might be at a slight angle, but not much, okay? So don't go crazy with making them look like they're at an angle. I would err on the side of keeping them more flat. What you could do is paint the whole thing first sort of, this is like a little burnt umber and white with maybe a little bit of maples in there. Kind of paint them first, just block it in, the whole dock. Might have to be lighter than that, especially back here. Oh, a little too dark maybe. And then once you have it in there, you can come in here and gently put the little slats. But I'd be careful about number one, don't make them at too much of an angle or they're going to feel like it's like a waterfall. It's going to look like they're, you know, put them sort of at maybe a slight slant, but not much. And I'm just putting it sort of wet into wet. As they get back here, they get closer together. And then back here, they're actually going the opposite way. They're following the form. If you start at this end and see that angle, then they would follow that form. And the side of the dock also is kind of dark. So we're going to just kind of use the same colors, ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin, maybe a little hint of burnt sienna in there, keep it grayish purple. And we need some water in here, which I would say would be in these colors here. You could have a little bit of that cerulean blue. If you want, what you could do is put the whole thing in first, just sort of the regular sky color that you have up there, and then introduce, just like you did before, some other colors to give it a nice look of other things reflecting in the water. So once we haven't blended the water yet, which we will in a minute, but let's first get things blocked in. This also has a little dark side to it right here, just like this is a dark side here. And then on this side of the dock, we have a shadow, we have a reflection here, and then we'll have sky again. Now, with this sky here, what I would recommend is let's take a clean paper towel, wipe most of the paint off, and I would pull this down again one more time into the sky area so that the edge doesn't look like a hedge clipped edge, but it looks kind of raggedy and like a reflection. And I'm just brushing the darker purpley green color down. And then I could take some, and if you blend it too much, you can add some more back in there. And then I'm going to wipe my brush, and I'm going to, gotta be careful. If I pull the purple into the yellow, I'm going to lose that yellow. So I'm going to pull up, always kind of pull your lighter colors into your darker colors. And just kind of, I have to almost wipe my brush each time because I'm picking up color as I do this. And this is just blending. What we're doing is pulling one color into another and getting at a nice soft edge so that it's not a hard edge thing. You can come back in here very quickly and just kind of brush it very lightly horizontally, which will make the paint look like it's laying flat. And just like we talked before, take a little light blue in a couple places. I kind of lost those shadows a little bit. Okay, hold on. I want those shadows just a little bit darker. I think I over blended just a little bit. Let's just go put them back in just a little bit more. Okay. Then take your light blue and let's make a few ripples. Because again, like I said, when you look at this, ripples tell you this is water. You also can do it the opposite way. You could take a little bit of your dark purpley color, your ultramarine blue, your alizarin, maybe a touch of burnt sienna to gray it just slightly. And in a couple places where the trees are, you could also put a few little darker lines suggesting ripples of the dark trees. So you can go both ways. You can put darks in, you can put lights in, so that it starts feeling like water. As we get to this boat now, let's work this boat out. The boat is very dark compared to other things in here. And so I'm going to use the same palette I've been using, purple grays. The boat's got to be darker than the water, I think. So I'm going to use my dark purple that I use for the trees back here. It's kind of a purple gray, I guess I should say. It has a little bit of burnt sienna in it. And it can go a little lighter on the inside in here because the light's catching in there. So we'll go just a little bit lighter right there on the side. In the side, the boat itself, we have a paddle, we have a seat. So what we could do first is just kind of fill it in with sort of the same lighter color that we used on the side there. I'm just going to kind of fill it in first. And I'm going to put a seat. The seat actually is catching light because it's laying flat facing the sun, facing the sky. So let's put a little seat in there. And to make that seat stand out better, I may take a little dark and put a little dark line right under it just so it feels like that's the edge of the seat. And also at the ridge of this boat, there's a little light catching all along the ridge. Might have to go lighter than that. I might even use, I use the light purple, but I might use Naples and white actually. That might show up better. Put it on this side too. And then the side of the boat's very dark in the front, not as dark on the side. So go back to my dark purple first and put in this dark purple, purple gray. We'll get that little light line in there in a minute. And actually, it stays pretty dark all the way down at the bottom because where the water and the boat meet, it's really, you can't tell the difference between the two lines. We're going to kind of melt them a little bit. But on the side of the boat here, maybe go just a little bit lighter right here. And then the nice thing about this boat, I think, is that because it does have that little, it's probably like a silver line or a white line, it helps define the boat. I'm just going to use a little like cerulean and white and make a little line. Goes a little darker right in the front, so maybe not quite as light right here in the front. And also need to put a little point on this boat right in the front. There's a little point. We'll put the shadow in. The shadow has to be, the dark reflection has to be quite dark because the sun is not hitting it here. This is a reflection, but it's also a shadow in the shadow area of the boat. And notice it curves out from the boat a little bit. So a little darker here. If you feel like, I add a little burnt sienna to get it darker. And then we also want to make this edge uneven. We don't want to paint a solid line. So I'm going to paint the edge here sort of broken up. That way, as I put the water in, I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to put in some of the other colors of the sky. As we get up higher in the sky, it gets a little bit lighter up here. So I will kind of begin to put some paint in here for the water. Again, blocking in and not worrying about blending at this point, just kind of blocking in color. And you can stroke, if it's a reflection, you can stroke horizontally. If it's not a reflection, you can stroke vertically. I mean, you can stroke horizontally. If it's a reflection, you want to stroke vertically first. So let's kind of I'm trying to get this covered. If you feel like your paint isn't moving, you can add a pinpoint of liquid, but be careful with that because you don't want to get it too soupy. Paint should be like the consistency of mayonnaise. You want it a little bit thick. Otherwise, it's just going to blend in with everything. Now, I'm going to take this water and just kind of hit the edge of that. I want to break that up so it doesn't feel like an object, but it feels like a reflection. And a lot of times what happens is when you do that, your reflection gets too big. So then you have to come in with your lighter color here and cut into it. And this is something that, you got to take your time and work on. I'm doing this as a demo, and so it may not be perfect right now. We also have a shadow under that dock. So let's put a little shadow in here. It connects with this one here, actually. A little darkness right under there. And again, stroke horizontally. I think my boat feels a little too short. I might elongate it a little bit. To me, it feels like it's not quite long enough. I'm going to make this a little darker. Later on, some of the things you might want to do is you might want to go ahead and put in the little posts that are in there. And remember that if you put a post in, let's say this one here is slightly angled. So if it's angled this way, it's got to, the reflection, and you can squiggle your line a little bit, has to angle out the other way. We'll put this one in here, back here. There's one here. And again, another reflection. So, a couple of things. I want this land back here to sit, so I'm going to tap on some darker color right at the base of that. Some of the darker colors that I already have on my palette. Yeah, that bugs me. I'm going to pull this boat out to a little bit longer. The boat looks like it's built for a first grader. We want adults to be in this boat. So I'm going to pull this out just a little bit more. And anytime you make a correction like that, you're going to have to come in and, change all your lines. This is also a place where you may pull out a smaller brush. I just been using the same one. Also, if I'm making the boat bigger, I got to make the reflection bigger. Anyway, it's starting to take shape. I mean, obviously, it needs some work. Clean this up. Oops, clean that up a little bit. The other thing you can do too is let's say with this boat, I'm just, don't like the shape of it. I think it's still a little too short. It's getting better, but still a little too short. I can let it dry, because when it's dry, it's a lot easier to go in here and fix it. It's not like, because right now everything's wet, everything I put down is blending in with what I already put down. So if I wait and let this dry, then I can come in here and very easily fix this boat. The other thing you got to remember is this boat right now feels like it's floating. I've got to get a very, very dark line underneath the boat to make wherever this boat is hitting the ground or the water, it's got to be very dark so that it sits down in the water. Any questions so far on either of them? We did the the dusk one, which actually, when you think about dusk, you're using a limited palette. You're using just a few colors that you've used in the sky, darker versions, lighter versions, but everything is kind of related. In this one, we've used yellow greens, darker blue greens. We actually stuck some mountains in there. This has a little more color to it. However, in saying that, once this dries, I could go back in here and introduce some of the pretty colors that are in the sky, like a patch of orange. It would be very hard to put it in now. I can try, but what happens is, because everything's wet, it's going to very easily blend. Like I'd have to put it in and leave it and not play with it. Let me show you what I mean. I took a little bit of cad orange, added some Naples and white to it, and let's say I wanted to repeat that right underneath it. I could put that in there. See if I can blend it just a little. But you got to be careful or you're going to end up with a lot of mud. That's why I say it's better to wait until it dries and then go back in and hit stuff like that. See if I can put a little yellow underneath that. But that's the kind of thing that actually can make the water look very pretty too. I mean, having a few little colors like that. There was another place I think where I stuck like a real light, almost like a turquoisey color. You know. But again, like I said, I'd probably wait. Like right now, I think this is looking a little bit, probably jump the gun before when I put that in there. I need to fix this boat. The boat's bugging me. I think part of the problem is where the point of the boat is. If I put my brush straight across, is where the back of that is. So if I have that's the back, either I have to pull the back up or I have to drop this down. I think I'll pull the back up. This boat isn't very wide. If you look here, it's not very wide here. So that's probably a little too wide. It's part of the reason it looks a little short to me. But any questions? Let me unmute. Let me unpin first. And you can unmute yourselves. I think I have to unmute. God, here we go.
Jane?
Yeah.
I am doing a snow scene.
Oh,
with
nice.
clouds in the sky.
Uh-huh.
And I know I have to reflect the colors from the clouds on my snow, but I'm having trouble just getting the snow part looking like snow before I put the colors in.
So what I would do is for the snow that has sunlight hitting it, use white with just a little bit of Naples, give it a creamy white color. And then your shadow colors, or just like, let's say if there's like a slight hill, it's not all going to be one white color. You might add a little bit of a light blue or a light lavender. And then your real deeper shadow.
What I'm trying to do is show the shape of the land.
Right. And you know, you can play with it. Like put it down, and if you decide, I hate this, let it dry. Don't wipe it off. Let it dry. And then when you come back, it's so easy to fix things because you've got a layer of paint down and you just play and manipulate what you're putting on top of that. And it can look really good the second time around. So that's why I say, don't let your emotions get you crazy and you go, I'm going to wipe this. I hate this. Do not do that. Resist, because I guarantee you, once it's dry and you come back and work on it, you'll be shocked. Within a half hour, you can have that painting looking great.
Yeah, well, that's where I am now. I've got the first part down, but the sky is looking okay, but the snow part isn't looking right yet.
Email me a picture of your painting, and let me just and also the photograph, and let me just look at it, and I'll give you some hints. But I think you'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Jane.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, your sky and what you just did looks terrific.
Oh,
but I have a question for you about wet sand and dry sand. Can you remind me what colors to use for each of those, wet sand and dry sand?
Okay, remember wet sand is, because it's wet, it's now reflecting the sky. So it will have blues and it might look purple, but it's going to have either blue or purple in it if it's wet. If it's dry sand, it's going to be more in the maybe, you could use burnt umber, Naples, and white, but a lot of Naples and a lot of white, you know, very light tan color. Dry sand's going to be more of a tan color, and wet sand is going to definitely be blue or purple, because it's...
Does yellow gray work?
Yeah, yellow gray is great. It's a color. I asked the woman, Ann Brown, who started the new art store, but she said it's made by Holbein, and I guess they won't sell to her. But yellow gray is made by Holbein. There's two colors they make that I love, yellow gray and violet gray. This is like perfect sand color. And you squeeze it out, you got sand. Or a dirt path or something like that. And the violet gray I love. I use it to put in skies and cloud shadows, and it's also a great color too. But
I'm sorry, who makes that?
Holbein, Holbein. It's Plaza carries it. That's the only place I know that carries Holbein. Well, actually, I take it back. The Art League down at the Torpedo Factory, they carry it too. But you could also you could order it online.
And Jane, when you say Naples, do you always mean Naples light or just regular Naples?
I usually just use, it doesn't matter. I mean, I use regular Naples because I can add white to it. But the Naples light is pretty too.
Jane,
Yeah.
Back to the wet sand.
Yes.
How dark should you make it? It's at the bottom. It's coming toward you. Can I make it fairly dark purple?
Yeah, but be careful because sometimes a photograph makes things darker than it really is in real life. So if you put it down and it seems to like grab too much attention, add a little bit of white to your purple and just lighten it up a little bit.
Okay.
Jane, the white in your clouds, the bright white, is that Naples and yellow?
Yeah. Well, no, I think that was cad yellow and white. But
Okay.
you could use Naples and white.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Jane, I still get kind of stuck on the shadows and clouds. Do you ever use a black or something that really truly makes it a little more gray looking?
I would not use black. Matter of fact, if you bought a tube of black, throw it in the trash can.
No, I didn't buy it yet.
Okay,
but
don't buy it.
remember.
If you want to buy a gray, you can buy a gray. Sometimes they give you a free tube of Turret Gray. Turret Gray is a color that Gamblin takes when they clean their pots out after they've mixed paint. They throw it in a tub and they mix them all together and it comes out to a gray color. There's two grays that I've bought before, and one's called a warm gray and a cool gray. You could buy those two and just add a little bit. But personally, if you practice making gray with ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and white, keep it more on the blue side than the brown side. So you'll come out with a very pretty gray, and it'll be a blue gray. Now, if you add too much brown, it's going to be a brown gray. So
yeah, I kept getting brown
gray. So I would add a pinpoint of burnt sienna because burnt sienna is probably a little stronger color than ultramarine blue, and it's dominating. So you don't need that much to gray it. If you mix a blue and white combination, you add a pinpoint of burnt sienna to it, it's going to gray that color down.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say gray a color, is that the same as muting a color, or is gray?
Yeah, if you're trying to mute something, you're trying to gray it a little bit. You're trying to keep it less intense in color.
Right.
Any other questions? Yeah, Steve?
Okay. I'm also doing a painting that has snow in the near field.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point previously made, trying to create a shape, very subtle differences in these whites, and I'm trying to figure out how to lay the paint down and whether or not, to blend it between, let's say, a slightly darker snow color and a slightly lighter snow color. To lay down one, let it dry, and then lay down the next, and then blend.
I would probably mix up, let's say you're doing all light snow first. Do one that's Naples and white. Do one that's a little bit of cerulean and white. Maybe do a lavender and white. And as you put them down, do not blend them. Put them down in little spots where you want it. And then once you have the whole thing covered, take a look at it and maybe subtly blend in between. Or just leave it. It can look really pretty if it's kind of spotty. And then you could go in towards a little bit darker color, and you can put that in. Now, those I would blend. I would blend if you start putting a little darker shadow snow color down. Blend those. But maybe all the light ones, if you have the difference between a Naples and white and a cerulean blue and white, it's pretty to see because what you're telling, the ones that's Naples and white is probably the one that's facing the sky the most, and maybe the cerulean and white is just slightly going uphill. It's still getting some, light from the sky, but not much. And then when it dips down into a gully, that's where you have your shadow. So.
Okay, and again, similar to the way you approach clouds, where you're blending the lighter into the darker.
Yep, always. Always blend light pull the lighter color into the darker color, because what will happen is, and you can try this just on a little spare, if you put some light down and some dark down, and you try to blend the dark into the light, the next thing you know, everything's mid-tone. You don't have dark and you don't have light.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Reminder, next week we are off, no class next week, and that's to give you time to finish your clouds and also to finish a landscape. And I really would like you to try to do something and send them to me. We'll post them on Jane's Fabulous Artists on the Facebook page. And then our next project is the lily pond. What do you call them? Water lilies in a pond. And I've got a million pictures. You can also Google lily pond or water lilies, or think of anything you can think of, like that. I took a lot of pictures also out at, I don't know if you've ever been to this aquatic gardens out there on Kenilworth Avenue. Oh my gosh. If you've never been there, it's like around June, beginning of June, when all the water lilies bloom, and then later June, these lotus flowers. I mean, it's incredibly beautiful. So I will send you a lot of pictures. You can do a little small one if you want, with just like 1 or 2 flowers and a couple lily pads and water. Or if you want to do a bigger one, you can do that too. And I'll send you lots of photos. Let's say I send a bunch of photos and you love the pink flower in one photograph, but you like the lily pads in the other. Print them both out, and you use the pink flower one for the flower you want in your painting, and you use the lily pads for the other part of your painting. Well, nothing wrong with using more than one photograph. It doesn't have to be the perfect photograph to do a painting. And I personally think paintings, you don't want just a water lily and nothing around it. You need some lily pads, They're pretty. They're facing the sun, they're yellow-green, they're beautiful. If they go back in the distance, they get a little more muted green, not so bright yellow, but more of a blue-green. And then, of course, we'll have water, and if it's a beautiful blue sky, you're going to have this beautiful blue water. So they can be really pretty. I'll send you some pictures of water lily pond paintings that I've seen that I like, and I'll send them to you. And I wouldn't advise you copying somebody else's artwork, because that's their work. But it might give you an idea of how people have done it in the past. And certainly you can probably even type in Google Images, put in lily pond paintings, and you'll probably come up with 5 million. Anyway, I think those will be beautiful paintings, because those flowers are so pretty, and it'll be nice. So we'll be doing the flowers, the lily pads, which are leaves, and then we'll be doing water again. So. But anyway, next week, no class, and that will give you time to finish your painting. For that matter, since you set aside 2 o'clock on Thursdays, why don't you just plan to paint on Thursday and finish your painting? And even if you don't have a lot of time, if you just paint for an hour, you'll be surprised how much you can get done in an hour. And then put it aside and go about all the other stuff you have to do for the day. But make yourself paint an hour at least here and there. Twice a week, let's say. All right, everybody. I love you guys.
Love you, Jane.
And can't wait to see what you do.
Thanks, Jane.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'll see you later, Jane.
Okay, yeah, if anybody wants to come tonight, you're welcome to come. We're going to be doing the same thing. And I will post this video once it finishes.
Thank you. Sorry that with all the mess up in the beginning, Jane. It's Maggie.
Yeah, I think what happened is you had 2 open.
Well, what happened was, he got another laptop and loaded it downstairs so I could have one in my studio. Because as currently, I've got this in my office, but